Gympie has held a rich history in music and the arts. Today we look at the history of the theatres and physical spaces where many of our concert bands, dances, orchestras, travelling shows, plays, school events, meetings, awards nights, silent films and talkies were held. As we travel back and visit these spaces, some long gone, demolished and burnt down, or taken new shape, we will also touch on the people who may have started or owned the theatre, the performers and names of the bands and musicians who played events, and the dramatic groups, actors and actresses who performed in these venues. The first Australian show of talking pictures was on the Edison kinetophone of Charters Towers on 16th of September 1895. Going to the pictures was a full night's entertainment, with one or two newsreels, a cartoon, a serial, and one or two feature films. There was also an interval before the second feature. Now, film projection was an art. The projection of a small 35mm image onto the big screen needed a very big bright light, and this was first provided by burning a mixture of potash and manganese through ether and onto a small block of lime, hence the name limelight. Later, carbon rods were also used. Many picture theatres burnt down, particularly before the 1940s, due to the flammable film used that contained nitrocellulose and camphor. Fires were always a danger with its use. Before we begin with the photos, did you know we have a local history blog called Gympie Regional Memories? Go to gympieregionalmemories.com. Remember, if you have any photos to share, information or wonderful stories, please get in contact with us here at the library. There was an Empire Theatre run at both Mount Pleasant in Gympie and also one in Imbil. They were run conjointly under the control of Country Amusements Proprietary Limited. Advertisements for the Mount Pleasant Theatre would state at the bottom, "This program will be screened at Imbil next Saturday." Gympie's Empire Theatre was the first spawn, opening with a grand concert at 8 p.m. on Friday the 7th of March 1919. This grand opening concert featured the greatest constellation of star artists that have ever performed in Gympie. Performers included Jefferson's Orchestra, a piano and violin duet by Mr. and Mrs. Brow, musical glasses by Mr. E. Flay, and many singers and vocal duets, with the finale being a rendition of God Save the King. The theatre was fitted with a large and commodious stage and beautiful scenery. The theatre was situated at Graham Street of 1 Mile and Mount Pleasant areas. In April 1919, the Federal Band held a dance in the theatre, advertising it, of course, as the best dance of the season, with music by Miss Kate Hayes on piano, Mr. J. Bro on violin, and Miles Monks and Mr. F. Paul on cornet, with Mr. Williams on drums. Many dramatic plays were held at the Empire Theatre. Some of the first in April 1919 were the fine art drama Playing the Game and an enthralling mystery drama, The Crimson Stain Mystery. A second concert was also held by the Federal Band in May of its first year, and a newspaper report in the Gympie Times claimed it was well attended and very successful. Prior to the commencement of the concert, Jefferson's band played a few selections outside the theatre, and during the concert, Jefferson's orchestra enlivened the proceedings in each half of the program by spirited overtures, and a cleverly danced Irish jig by Miss Mary Horgan evoked admiration. On Saturday the 27th of November 1937, a new Empire Gardens Picture Theatre was officially opened by the then Mayor, Alderman L. Thomas, at 7:45 p.m. immediately prior to the first program. The grand opening featured Jan Kapura singing Give Us This Night, a murder mystery, a Popeye cartoon, airmail news and colour classics. The Gympie Times newspaper inspected the new theatre and reported that they were impressed by the up-to-dateness of the equipment and the care that has been taken to provide comfort for patrons. The body of the theatre should be cool in summer owing to the absence of enclosed buildings or other structures, while a portable canvas roof is provided for cooler nights. A reserved area is under permanent cover. Between 900 and 1,000 deluxe canvas chairs are installed with hygienic head covers as per of city standard. The Empire Gardens Theatre, managed by Mr. Rawlinson with equipment from Country Amusement Proprietary Limited, was situated next to Mrs. G. F. Lister's store and the drapery premises, with a newly painted frontage. Many films were also showed at the Empire, including one that stood out for me when researching. In 1938, Popeye, the Saucy Sailor, in a film advertised as a walking dream, when in fact it is actually a dream walking. Oh, how I would love to have seen that one. Also shown were westerns such as Hopalong Cassidy Returns, featuring 3 western favourites, Windy, Pegleg and Oppie, in Mulford's special Yarn of the West. What happened to Mount Pleasant's Empire Theatre? Can anyone share a story or some news? And as we go along today, remember, if you have any history of any of these theatres to share, please get in touch. Joy King's research on the Empire Theatre in Imbil is comprehensive and published in her 2001 historical reference called Imbil, the Jewel of the Mary Valley. She writes that the travelling picture shows such as Sydney Pictures had been visiting Imbil as early as 1917, and later the Popular Pictures from Cooroy. A chap named Jack Magic used to visit once a month, and a man named German Jack, who we will also talk about later, as he travelled around the region and also visited Kananga. These fellows set up for shows in the hall. Now, German Jack used a Ford to produce the power to drive the projector by means of a sprocket on the tail shaft, which drove the generator, which in turn drove a bicycle chain. Thanks must also go to the Facebook page Imbil Then and Now in Photographs, which kindly provided the photos of the Imbil Empire Theatre. The photographer was Imbil-born local Doris Bigham, née Gilroy, who thankfully snapped these wonderful pictures on a box brownie camera. Imbil's Empire Theatre, known as Imbil Empire Talkies, was situated at what is now 112 Yabba Road. The theatre was opened on the night of the 5th of December 1936 by Harley Maudsley as a half-roofed and half-open-air cinema with 400 new canvas seats fitted with hygienic head covers. He managed the theatre for Country Amusements Company Proprietary Limited. The theatre had perfect full-frequency sound that was first installed at Cloncurry, and everything was perfectly presented as to equal a city theatre. Many benefits also were held at the theatre in support of the community. In 1938, a function for the school was held with a film that was followed by a dance, with the music supplied by the Boomerang Orchestra. A profit of over £200 was achieved for the school. In 1952, Mr. Maudsley, affectionately known as Pop Maudsley, decided to sell the theatre, and it was offered to Charles Stubbins. Charlie took on the theatre after relinquishing his dairy business, and with wife Thelma provided shows on Wednesday, Friday and Saturday nights, and sometimes a matinee on Saturday afternoons. This continued until the early 1970s, until the theatre closed in 1970 due to the pressures of the advent of television. The old theatre building is now converted into several shop fronts. The old theatre now houses the Town and Country Bakery, and the old Maudsley's Bakery building is now home to the Rattler Cafe. The Olympic Hall was built in about 1885 by F.T. Percival, a well-known musician and conductor of bands in Gympie. and in which the Memorial Park Bandstand is dedicated to. It was situated right here where the Gympie Library sits. It was used for some time as a theatre and a skating rink before Fullerton's General Store operated there in the mid-1890s and was still referred to as the Olympic. In the late 1890s, West's Pictures negotiated the lease from Cullinan's, the building known as Olympic Hall, and then renamed the Olympic Theatre when West's Pictures took it over. In 1912, Mr. Dan Carroll took over the lease, with Cook's Pictures under management of his Birch and Carroll Company. He took over the Olympic Theatre from Royal Pictures. In the same year, 1912, Cullinan's purchased the adjoining block on the corner of Lawrence and Mellor Streets, and the paper reported plans of a future open-air theatre. It will be conducted by the same management and in conjunction with the Olympic Theatre. In 1916, Cullinan's started building the open-air theatre on Cullinan's Corner, as it was known, and by that time the theatre and air dome were known as Olympia. The architect was Henry E. White of Sydney. The grand opening was on Boxing Day, 1916. An opening between the air dome and the Olympia Theatre was arranged so that in the event of wet weather, patrons could transfer into the Olympia for continuation of the picture. Mabel Cox played the piano for the silent pictures at the Olympia, playing for hours at a time, for some years before she went and made a career in music. She was a lyric soprano. Mr. Bill Ryder, who was a former well-known bandmaster, produced many successful comedies at the Olympia, and one particularly famous one called The Arcadians, in which a live horse was led on stage in the race scene. Birch and Carroll's continued operating the theatre before selling to the Hamers around the early 1920s. The Hamers were Frank and his wife Mona, who arrived in Gympie from out west. Mona was a polished pianist and a musician. Frank, a keen businessman, had taken over the Theatre Royal, and in only a short time he acquired the other theatres in Gympie, the Olympia and Air Dome, and the Tivoli, which we'll get to very soon. This is also why many of the advertisements for the theatres were combined, such as Air Dome and the Tivoli, showing the same films on the same night. Mrs. Hamer would play the piano at the Olympia to the silent films, accompanied by other musicians playing drums, cornet and violin. The Olympia was very successful, with sold-out concerts and shows, with standing room only advertised. In 1929, Frank began negotiating with the Western Electric Company to have talkies installed in the Olympia Theatre. Frank Hamer was on the ball and he switched to them quickly. Many variety shows were staged there to raise funds for the war effort. The Olympia also staged wrestling comps, boxing and other sport in the theatre. In 1938 and 1939, the theatre was remodelled under Cullinan's Proprietary Limited by contractors Bunderson and Sons. It could then seat 1,200 people with comfortable seating and also featured a glassed and soundproof crying room for the convenience of mothers with distressed children endeavouring to pacify their infants. The air dome was also gas heated. The theatre was used for many different purposes, which included concerts, estate, political rallies, both Deakin and Fisher spoke there, receptions, golden casket draws, balls, picture shows, fundraising activities, and boxing, as we said, along with other sports. Local radio station 4GY held its first broadcast from the Olympia Theatre at 8 p.m. on the 3rd of November 1941, when Mr. R.S. Turner became the first of many voices to be heard on 4GY broadcasts. 4GY then commenced broadcasting from its then premises on Brisbane Road, Monkland. In September 1945, the Olympia hosted a gala premiere screening of the all-talking, all-Gympie film Invitation to Gympie, which featured panoramas of the city, parks, memorials, mining, farms, dairies, bean growing, fruit, butter factories and more. produced and released throughout Australia by W.H. Carroll. The open-air theatre, the Air Dome, closed and was sold, and the present building built on the corner, which originally opened for the Commonwealth offices, opened in 1967. The Vanada Syndicate was the last to own the business and ran it until its closure. The last and final screening at the Olympia Theatre was on Saturday the 16th of April 1977, with a night of nostalgia, with a Mayoress Gala charity night to benefit the Red Cross and Meals on Wheels. It was attended by 600 people, with the Caledonian Pipe Band and the Gympie Municipal Pipe Band playing as patrons arrived. The last showing was That's Entertainment Part 2, which featured over 100 actors, actresses and Hollywood stars of the silver screen over the years. In the interval, Karen Houlihan sang a rendition of Amazing Grace. Ravellis sang and toasted the old girl with Auld Lang Syne. The scene was described as reminiscent of the departure of an ocean liner as the tapestry of streamers from the gallery to the stalls tore apart. A fitting finale. The building went straight into demolition, commencing 20th of April until the June of 1977. The screen and speakers from the theatre are housed at the Gympie Gold Mining and Historical Museum. The new building construction became Barry's department store. It was used for retail and office purposes, such as social security, until the Gympie Regional Libraries moved into it in 1995. At the site where the Royal Hotel stands was originally the Exchange Hotel and Varieties Theatre, built only months after the gold rush and opened by August 1868. This was an exciting development for Gympie, which was booming at this time. The then proprietor of the Varieties Theatre was Stephen Parker Scowen, and the lessees were the Leopold brothers. The theatre showed live performances such as Miss Creed's Royal Benefit, with performances of The Black-Eyed Susan and a comedy entitled A Quiet Family. In July 1870, Mr. Scowen advertised sale of the Exchange Hotel and Varieties Theatre. In December 1870, the licence was taken up by Mr. John Hanlon. By April 1872, the Exchange Hotel premises, licence, furniture and effects were advertised for sale by Hanlon. In 1875, a cyclone destroyed part of the theatre and floods submerged most of the town. The licence of the hotel was cancelled, but was rebuilt into a two-storey timber structure designed by architect Hugo de Ritz. The stage will be fitted with new scenery, decorations, etc. as soon as practicable. The body of the hall will be much more comfortable than hitherto, and there will be good ventilation, and a good piano will always be in readiness. The doors are spacious and all open outwards. The lighting will also be improved, and the gallery and second seats will be more comfortable than before. It officially reopened as the Varieties Hotel and Theatre. J.H. Bennett was licensee up until August 1884, when it was transferred to James McCann. But McCann's time was brief before he left to take over a hotel in Brisbane. In June 1885, licence was granted to James Chappell, who was also given permission to change the name of the Varieties Hotel and Theatre to the Royal Hotel, known as Chappell's Royal Hotel and Theatre Royal. In the Gympie Mining Handbook published in 1887, A. Leake wrote that the Royal's Theatre and Dancing Room, built behind the hotel, was crowded with audience pretty well every evening. There was a fiddle and a piano for band. There was a bar also, which almost goes without saying. Locals were treated to their first movie at the Theatre Royal, which was a picture of British warships passing through the Suez Canal. The movie was made realistic by men behind the screen making sounds such as waves lapping and sirens blowing. In June 1929, there were 2 arson attempts to burn the Royal Hotel. Both fires were quickly noticed and extinguished with no damage to the building. But sadly, tragedy struck in 1935 when a fire razed the building to the ground. In 1938, Bulimba Brewery purchased the site and rebuilt the Royal Hotel. reopening in 1939 sans the theatre but with an elegant Art Deco facade. An English comedian and vocalist, Robert Billy Barlow, began building Barlow's Apollonian Philharmonic Music Hall in late 1867 and into early 1868. Apollonian meaning in ancient Greek, Apollo, god of theatre and music. In September 1868, Barlow was granted the first licence for hotel. He staged quite elaborate performances of vaudeville, variety and music balls at the hotel, but it was short-lived. After only 7 months, he put the hall and hotel and considerable inventory up for an unreserved public auction. On the 23rd of March 1869, William Taylor became licensee and renamed the hotel to Taylor's Apollonian Hotel and Music Hall. Taylor established a high reputation and continued to run the hotel and music hall with lavish advertising. Later, in 1869, Taylor enlarged the music hall building. The hotel also staged frequent wrestling performances, and Taylor imported a billiard table from Melbourne. After 5 years of operation in 1874, Taylor sold to John Henry Bennett, who was a famous wrestler. Bennett advertised his new proprietorship by saying that at his hotel, drinkers would have the privilege of watering down their own beer for themselves, inferring that the other pubs did it for them. Bennett gave the hotel the name it is known as today, Apollonian Hotel. In early 1879, due to either fire or dilapidation of the earlier building, the present Apollonian Hotel was built. It was during the construction that Bennett continued to run temporary bar facilities and continuing promenade balls at a rented premises. The Apollonian Hotel also has a wonderful history with Miss Mabel Cox, who we mentioned earlier from the Olympia Hotel. She was a wonderfully brilliant soprano. Her father, Richard Cox, owned the hotel around the turn of the century. He later became a mayor of Gympie. Mabel sang in the Apollonian Hotel in these times and drew crowds from far and wide. The concert hall, which is now the dining room, is dedicated to Mabel Cox, and many of her personal effects are on display. The hotel has had numerous licensees in its history. In 1935, Gympie had fallen on quiet times, and after the Second World War finished, the then licensee Herman Labuda auctioned the premises on the basis that there were too many hotels in Gympie and times were slow. Max Lose of the Gympie Building Company bought the premises and used the premises as an office and storage space for his business. Mr. Lose owned and maintained the building until 1986, when he decided to develop the site. The building was to be demolished, but a decision was made to save the fine old hotel and relocate it to Boreen Point on the shores of Lake Catharaba on the Noosa River, where it still stands today and continues to trade as the Apollonian Hotel. Known as the Cameron Building now, where Foxy Lady is at 67 Mary Street, Gympie. On the 20th of July 1927, J&L Cameron advised the Town Clerk of Gympie City Council that they had purchased from Mr. John White the property known as the People's Cash Store on the 1st of July 1927. They built a new building, shops, with living accommodation above. Around 1935-1936, they built a skating rink at the rear of the original complex called the Coronation Glideway Skating Rink. It was officially opened the 19th of May 1937 with entrance off Young Street behind, where 5 large doors folded back. About 400 skaters were on the floor soon after the doors opened at 7:30 p.m. The skate floor is made of specially selected spotted gum, which was allowed to season for 6 months, laid in an octagonal fashion. In August 1938, the Camerons built a new picture theatre to replace the Coronation Glideway skating rink. Columns that supported the roof were removed and redesign work commenced. The skating rink timber floor was retained and still remains there today. The new theatre building was opened by the Mayor, Alderman L.J. Thomas, and supported by Mr. T. Dunstan, MLA, on Saturday, September 3, 1938. There was seating accommodation for 1,250 and a room for a few hundred more. In the splendid dress circle were 400 deeply sprung and padded seats. In the front of the dress circle was a mayoral box and featured a delicate decorative border pattern of blue and gold. A beautiful shimmery drop curtain made of gold chenille covered the screen when not in use. The side doors were also concealed by heavy blue pelmet curtains. The foyer was very large. It led from the Mary Street entrance through to what was the showroom of J&L Cameron's business premises, 70 feet back to the main entrance to the theatre and 20 feet wide. Patrons waited in the foyer. There was plenty of room not to be waiting out on the sidewalk. Plus, there were comfortable seats and lounge couches in the foyer against the walls, and it was also lavishly decorated, with pictures, mirrors, flowers and ferns, and the blue and gold decorative motifs as matching to the mayoral box. On the 6th of November 1947, the management of the Liberty Theatre Proprietary Limited Brisbane took over and renamed to the Liberty Theatre. The theatre underwent alterations, adding cooling and fluoro lighting systems. Additionally, a milk bar was established adjacent. It is believed the theatre closed around 1965-66. It is also said that the rear doors to Young Street, the ticket box, dress circle and the chenille curtain are still there unchanged. The mayoral box is now a landing with steps leading to it. The skating rink floor is intact and the projection equipment has been stored. The Tivoli Theatre was situated in Mary Street to the left of the Memorial Park gates. Frank and Mona Hamer acquired the lease on the Tivoli in the early 1920s, as mentioned earlier, along with the Olympia and Theatre Royal. But just previous to this, the Tivoli advertised on Saturday the 8th of January 1916 that the program at the theatre had been strongly reinforced for that night by the great Wild West cowboy picture, The Sheep Herder, and that Sherlock Holmes' skedaddle is causing much interest. Further to this advertisement is the rather entertaining concept put to the attendees for the night. They were to find the manager, who will be disguised and looking at the pictures along with the crowd. Anyone who sees him has to but tap him on the back with a copy of the Gympie Times of January the 8th and say, "I demand £1, please, pay me cash." And if it is the right man, the money will be promptly paid. In April 1920, an advertisement was made in the papers for offering of shares of the Gympie Tivoli Theatre for the first time to the general public. By June 1925, it was reported the insolvency of Ada Jane Reed Ryan, conductor of a moving picture show in the Tivoli Theatre Gympie. Her husband was a saddler who also kept racehorses and worked for his brother. Mr. and Mrs. Ryan lived in the house in the front of the theatre. On the 19th of February 1926, a young Lloyd George, aged 12 years, fell from the ceiling of the Tivoli Theatre and was seriously injured. It was reported that, with a young companion named Whittington, he had gone into the theatre and got on the ceiling by a ladder. He then jumped on a square of asbestos and fell through it to the floor, a drop of about 30 feet. He fell on a row of chairs, breaking 2 of them. He was taken to the hospital suffering from concussion, several fractured ribs, abrasions to the face and legs, contusion over the right eye, and other injuries. Previously, George had lost the sight of one eye through being hit with a stick while playing. The Tivoli Theatre, as owned by Mr. Belson and also surrounding shops, suffered disastrous fate from fire on the night of Saturday 11th of May 1929. The newspapers report that the fire broke out at 11:30 p.m. and a large crowd that were in the Gympie Times office watching the posting of the state election results heard the cries of fire from a few hundred yards away. The fire outbreak had commenced in the Tivoli Theatre and the flames had a good hold before the brigade were notified. The building extended from Reef to Mary Streets. The fire brigade fought the fire from the back of the building and then later from Mary Street. exceptionally good work was done, and with the assistance of ex-members of the brigade, police and civilians, a splendid save was effected, as on both sides there are numerous large wooden buildings. The fire was under control by 1 a.m, but after great damage to the property had been done. It was one of 3 fires that night. There was later an inquest into the fires. The Witham Theatrette was originally built by the Church of Christ as their place of worship in 1887. The contract let to the 1 Mile Sawmills Company for construction. Finance was raised from a number of brethren who lent £25 each towards the project at no interest. Later a large portion of this was donated. The building has sat on the hillside on Crescent Road for all its lifetime. At the end of 1959, the building was purchased by the Gympie Musical and Dramatic Union from the church for the price of £800 by way of a National Bank loan. Mayor Ron Witham stood as guarantor for the loan, hence the name of the Witham Theatrette. Dr. Henry Kesteven was president of the Gympie Musical and Dramatic Union at the time and was keen for the union to purchase the building. He organised the purchase of seating for the theatrette from a disused theatre in Sydney. Prior to the purchase of the theatrette, the Gympie Musical and Dramatical Union used the large assembly room at the old Gympie Town Hall for rehearsals, and the grand piano was housed there. On Friday evening, the 4th of December 1959, the Mayor, Alderman Ron Witham, officially opened the Witham Theatrette with the pulling of the curtain cord, and a children's play called Make Believe was presented by the Dramatic Union. In late 1959, the Musical Union was using the theatrette for rehearsals but still staging its productions in the Olympia Theatre. From the late 1960s, many Musical and Dramatic Union productions were held at the theatrette, which was also used by the Visiting Arts Council for their various productions and for Sunday concerts, Eisteddfods, etc. It was a fully functioning theatre until around 1968-1969. The old church's baptismal font, which is large enough for total immersion, was still in place, with the stage now built over. It caused an issue once for the Musical Union when it accidentally filled with water and costumes were discovered floating around in it. Around 1990, the church was given a little facelift and upkeep with new licks of cream paint. The beautiful old stained glass window was restored to its former glory by Jeff Stolberg of Gympie Glazing Works, and the top section of the front of the building was re-timbered, as the old timber was reported to be literally flapping in the wind. Early on, shows were performed in the Witham Theatrette, but after the Gympie Civic Centre was constructed and opened in 1977, it was more convenient and spacious to host them there. Keeping up appearances, TV star and movie actor Judy Cornwell found her acting feat in some of her father's productions in the Witham Theatrette. In the 2000s, 2 of Gympie's theatre groups have utilised the theatrette as a rehearsal venue. They were the Zodiac Players and the Gympie Musical and Dramatic Union. The Zodiac Players was formed in 1971 when Peter Blythe and others split from the Gympie Musical Union. The Zodiac Players produced Oliver in 2009 before it too was forced into hibernation by the high cost of hiring sound and lighting equipment necessary to stage a major musical in the Heritage Theatre. The Gympie Musical Union ceased productions by around 2008-2009, and the then long-time director and producer Brian Goldberg, who had been with the Musical Union since the 1950s, handed over the keys to the Witham Theatrette to a newly formed Gympie Regional Musical Union in 2009 with President Brendan Condon. The Zodiac Players theatre group also used the Witham Theatrette for readings, rehearsals and castings. The first drive-in in Australia operated in the suburbs of Melbourne in 1954, 2 years before the arrival of television. Their presence peaked in the late 1950s to the early 1960s and became the golden age of drive-ins, with 330 drive-ins built in Australia. The Scottish drive-in was built at a cost of $100,000 and officially opened by Alderman Ron Witham on Wednesday the 21st of February 1968. It was established by Mick and Tina Venatus of Venatus Holdings and located at 40 Noosa Road, Monkland, at the southern entrance of Gympie off Brisbane Road. The back was bordered by Deep Creek, which intersects off the Mary River and surrounded by open pasture. The Scottish drive-in grounds were situated behind a row of residential homes via a long nondescript driveway entry between homes. It was named the Scottish Drive-In as the famous Scottish mine nearby in Monkland. At the official opening, the Scottish theme was kept, with the Gympie Caledonian Pipe Band providing a selection of Scottish music, and attractive lasses wore tartan uniforms in the cafeteria. The proceeds of the opening night were generously donated by Venatus Holdings to 5 charity and local institutions. The drive-in was able to host a capacity of 308 cars with its 308 speakers, an impressive 45-foot-long, 30-foot-high screen, built from 40 pounds of railway line from the Gympie railway station. It was able to project 250 feet, and the drive-in operated 7 nights a week. Operating from 1968 to 1999, and was an entertainment precinct and continues to hold a significant social memory for the people of the Gympie region. Going to the Scottish Drive-In was a social event in the time when Gympie did not have much choice by other forms of entertainment. Friends got together to socialise, and the drive-in was a perfect backdrop for many of Gympie's first dates. Families created memories of first movies, and most patrons arrived early for a catch-up, with kids playing and meals were ordered from the kiosk, all before the film rolled. Well remembered and renowned were the homemade meals of burgers, hot chips, toasted sandwiches, and donuts fried and flipped by the yet-to-be-declared Mayor of Gympie, Mick Venatus. The drive-in had a family-friendly, small-town atmosphere, no matter how full the patronage was. The Paramount Theatre opened in Gympie on Wednesday the 23rd of October 1929 with a matinee at 2:30 p.m. of the film Children of Divorce, followed by a comedy called Señorita. There was an evening program at 7:45 p.m. with the feature being The Telephone Girl. The Paramount was located in the original Soldiers' Hall in Reef Street, Gympie. The Soldiers' Hall was used as a concert and dance hall since the 1920s, as well as being the sub-branch headquarters of the Gympie Returned Soldiers Association. Prior to 1920, the hall was called the City Band Hall and had originally been erected on the corner of Harkin Street and Mount Pleasant Road by the Pirate Football Club. But it was in 1920 when it was purchased by the Gympie sub-branch for £909. Late in 1920, a large continental carnival was launched and coincided with the opening of the Fallen Soldiers Memorial Park. From that carnival, the sum of nearly £1,000 was raised, and with this money the hall was altered and improved. The original Soldiers' Hall was demolished in early May 1957 to make way for the construction of a new modern RSL concert and dance hall at the cost of £19,000. Pat Towner has authored a book, Kabi Country, The Story of Kananga, and researched and wrote the story of the regular picture shows that commenced in Kananga. It was 1933 when regular picture shows commenced in the town, with thanks to Mr. W.H. Reinke, otherwise known as Bill, who leased the Kananga Hall and installed a complete talkie plant. The hall was still in use for other functions on other nights. Bill's day job was a blacksmith, but on Saturday nights, Kananga's social scene was at the pictures. Mrs. Amy Reinke heated pies for sale after the show, and Pat writes in her book Kabi Country that after the show one night, to Mrs. Reinke's dismay, found the pies burnt black on top. Being the resourceful woman she was, Mrs. Reinke produced some leftover mashed potato and quickly covered the tops of the pies. The patrons voted them the best ever, but their unexpected treat was somewhat marred by the black rings around their mouths. In 1936, the lease of the hall for the Picture Theatre was transferred to Jim Doyle. The Reinkes had moved to Mundubbera. Jim Doyle later became a councillor of the former Widgershire Council and was at one time owner of the Kananga sawmill. By 1942, Jim opened an up-to-date picture palace. It was built by English and Sons. It sat 400 people with canvas chairs and a gallery upstairs, referred to as Lovers' Corner, and held another 100 people. There was a refreshment cafe on one end of the veranda and the ticket box at the other end. It had an operating room with modern plant equipment. The theatre had escape doors, and all away from the main building was the engine house, which generated the power for the plant equipment. Jim ran a bus service to collect patrons from Amamoor for the pictures. Locals recount being collected in a cream truck to go to the Kandanga talkies. Kev McAnallen, before that, Slaughter's old truck. The cream carrier used to come down. Seats along the cream carrier would pick up anybody that was outside ready to go to Kandanga for the picture theatre. Movies were shown Wednesdays, Fridays and Saturdays. In addition to the above events, the hall was used for a variety of different gatherings, including hospital and ambulance benefit balls. It was rented out for meetings and church services, rental being free in the day but costing a small fee at night to cover the cost of lighting. Band concerts were held with money raised going to the Kandanga Brass Band. Balls, often fancy dresses, were held in aid of local groups such as the tennis club. Farewell socials for those leaving the district were run and included an evening for Mr. P. McGee of the Forestry Department. The school committee arranged concerts to aid school funds. Sports and plain and fancy dress balls raised money for the Gympie Hospital, and in 1928 there was a benefit for the Norman Football Club of Gympie. Pat's book also recounts that Mr. Doyle was a resourceful man, in that when young lads began to skylark in the gallery, he would reach through from the projection room with his walking stick and hook it around the neck of a young larrikin. Jim Doyle walked with the stick as a result of a broken leg that gave him a great deal of trouble. Jim was not a patient man, and when his leg was in a cast, and it therefore hampered with his movements on horseback, he simply removed the cast, of course prematurely. Forever after he walked with a severely bent leg. Prior to the Kandanga talkies in the hall, there was a man dubbed German Jack, who travelled around showing films, mostly good-class films and comedies. He ushered his patrons in with the cry of "Two bob, two bob." He arrived in Kandanga every few months in his stripped-down Model T Ford truck with no brakes. German Jack rectified the shortage of braking power by tying a log on behind to hold him on the downhill stretches. Mr. Doyle went on to sell the theatre to Peter Townsend and Peter Lutton in 1944. Renee and Percy Perrett later bought the business and were showing quality films to capacity crowds. Sadly, the theatre ceased operations in the late 1960s. In April 1989, the Gympie Times reported on the proposed demolition of the Kandanga Theatre. Pictures and talkies used to also be run out of the Amamoor Hall. The official opening of the Amamoor Hall was held on the 21st of May 1921, with Mr. H.F. Walker MLA officiating. He stressed the importance of such buildings to communities and counselled all the community to work together for its success. A ball was held to celebrate and was attended by approximately 230 people. Saturday night on the 11th of March 1922 saw a gala occasion displaying the new scenery and drop curtain painted by R.J. McFadden, a Gympie artist and performer. The entertainment started with the Kandanga Brass Band playing in front of the hall as the guests arrived. By 8 p.m. the hall was packed to suffocation with approximately 300 people. The first half of the program was occupied by the Amamoor Minstrel Troupe, whose many items and jokes of varying quality kept the audience amused. The second half of the concert showcased the talent of Mr. R.J. McFadden, known as Bob Fad, whose comic songs and patter were rendered in his unique style and much appreciated by the audience. The program ended to peals of laughter with a short fast set in a dentist's surgery. It concerned a man with a severe toothache who eventually had a very large tooth pulled from his mouth with nothing more than a piece of string. Refreshments were served, followed by dancing and with music from Miss Thompson, Mrs. Stevens, Miss McFadden, Messrs. J. Kerr and R.J. McFadden. A wonderful night was had by all who left with smiles on their faces. Dulcie Logan's History of Kilkievanshire book, called Where Two Rivers Run, records the memory of Paget's travelling pictures. They came to Kilkievan once a month with a horse-drawn vehicle carrying the gear. This was up until 1926. Firstly, they used carbide lights and later a generator, and the pictures screened on Saturday nights. It was in late 1925 that Clark McCarroll leased the Kilkievan Hall to show pictures, and he had installed a generator. Sadly, this closed down with the advancement of the talkie pictures and the Depression. Later, the showing of pictures started up again in the School of Arts Hall, with the last proprietor being Mr. Jim Batts, who had closed due to poor attendance and the advent of television. The newspaper Maryborough Chronicle confirms that there was a Mr. West who was the proprietor of the Kilkievan Picture Theatre in around 1945. The Hall of Memory at Goomeri was opened on the 28th of July 1926 to commemorate all those from the district who had served in World War I, but this dedication has since been extended to also honour all those who have served in subsequent wars. Individual brass plaques were unveiled inside and a memorial to deceased committee chairman John Mayne. The hall was leased as a picture theatre, ensuring regular income. It was initially leased to a Mr. A. Rich, who moved his silent pictures show there from Benara. Mrs. Rich had a sweet stall under the hall, which appears to have been enclosed soon after the relocation. The central porch contains a ticket box, accessed by a door in the hall and flanked by pairs of entry doors into the hall. A crow's ash floor was laid for dancing. Funds to clear the debt and cover the purchase of furniture, crockery and other essential items were raised by holding a series of events from 1927. These included a concert and ball, a sports day and procession, and a popular girl competition, won by Myrtle Veland, who was also one of the cinema pianists. These events were announced to have cleared the debt of £844 at Easter of 1929. In 1931, a large supper room with a kitchen was added. This room was also used for meetings and small functions. Mr. A. Duffy held a long lease on the hall to show films. He also acted as caretaker and installed electricity and equipment to show talkies. In the 1940s, he became one of the first operators in the country to install CinemaScope. During the Second World War, the basement area was used to store 600 long tons of emergency supplies for the area in case of Japanese invasion. In the 1950s, the demand for film shows fell. Films were shown only once a week and were eventually discontinued in the late 1950s, although the hall continued to be used for other events. In 1971, the Kilkievanshire Council accepted responsibility for the hall at the trustees' request. Following this, the kitchens were modernised and a bar and cold room installed at the supper room end of the hall. The RSL kitchenette was modernised in 1991 and is thought that the hall was re-roofed in 1995. The hall is still in regular use for a wide range of entertainments and social functions. That brings us to the end of our talk on the theatres of Gympie. Thank you for listening along. If you have any memories or photos of theatres, we'd love you to share them with us, so please get in touch. Here's how you can contact us.